Okay, so here we are. We're going to be talking with my guest, Richard Villasana, and we're going to be talking about foster kids. You may have heard the episode on emotionalsavvy.com. That's my podcast, where we talked in depth with Richard about foster kids and his lifetime commitment. So, welcome to this Facebook Live, Richard.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're just so welcome, and I'm delighted to have you. And I think it's very important for us when we ask the question, what can we do to help foster kids? We can't all be a foster parent, we can't all go and work in this system, but maybe there are some things that you could share with us that we can do. What might those be?
Well, that's a great question. And yes, I get asked that often. And there are many things that people could do to help a foster child. And I'm going to take it from the simplest, the easiest, and then kind of build up a little bit. So, for instance, in our organization, we're on Facebook. Someone can search for us as Forever Homes for Foster Kids. And there are many agencies out there and nonprofits that are working to help foster kids because the agencies need help. They need not only the help of nonprofits, but the nonprofits that support these agencies that have the foster kids. They also need the support. So it's a group effort. This cannot be done by just one organization. We can't leave it up to the government. The public has to step in, and having support from the public to the nonprofits who really provide a great deal of support to these foster care agencies is critical. So the first one, lots of agencies, lots of nonprofits are on Facebook, not just ours. That's one place to go. Comment, share, because the first step to anything is getting the word out. We understand that if we have a new restaurant, what helps them grow? Word of mouth, getting everyone in the neighborhood to say, wow, that was some great food. Well, the same thing applies here when it comes to foster children. We don't see them. They don't show up like football games, baseball games, politics. Foster kids are really hidden. So having someone go to a site like Facebook, find a charity, comment, like the page, and then share it with their friends is a great first step. Takes a little time, but can make such a difference.
So, creating visibility and letting people know this is something that I'm interested in. And one way we can support it is simply by getting more eyeballs on the website or in the Facebook group. So, you can find Richard's Facebook page there. And you can also go to his website here. These things will help you and help them. Now, one of the techniques that Rich is talking about is how to be an influencer on social media. When you really understand that something's important, then you want to give it a little push, give it a little lift up, give it a little shout out. And this is what Rich is talking about, how you can do that. And you can simply do that by saying, hey, yeah, I think this is important. Or what's something that you have learned that people need to know about, things like that. So what else could a person do? Say their heart is touched by maybe something you put on Facebook. And we all like the stories where some person has opened their heart and their home to 50 foster children during their life. That's always a feel good story. And it's always only a small part of the story compared to the number of kids who don't have that experience. Tell us a little bit about the breakdown on how many children find forever homes and how many children stay in the system till they age out.
So our system, the numbers, of course, vary from year to year, but generally speaking, there's about 425,000 children that are coming into the foster care system. And that number is growing because we have what they call an opioid addiction problem with the adults. Some were prescribed these medications by their doctors, and they have gotten hooked on these medications that are highly addictive. And now these parents are incapable of caring for their kids. And so we're seeing not just a few kids, we're seeing thousands of children coming into the foster care system because their parents aren't taking care of them properly. So we have this flood of children coming in. In general, about half of those children will go back to their parents. Maybe their parents needed to have some guidance on how to be a better parent. Maybe they needed to have some anger management courses, something that they were lacking that now we've been able to improve on. And that's a wonderful thing. It is good to be able to have better parents so that kids go back to a safe, healthy environment. That's 50% of the children each year. But now you're left with this other 225,000 children. And now that 100,000 is eligible to be adopted. And many are, but many more, especially when they get to be teenagers, they're 12, 13 years old. When you're 13 years old in this foster care system in our country, your chances of getting adopted are less than 1%.
Oh, that's
The
so
numbers
sad.
just, it is sad because, and the really sad part is the foster kids know this. This is not like a secret. They understand being in the system that 13 is pretty much, it's game over. And so
Mm-hmm.
they get depressed, they get sad, they do poorly at school, and they're still moving around in the system. And so those are children that can stay in for 4, 5, 7 years until they're 18, depending upon which state they live in, at which point they have the option to get out of foster care. Now, we've
Mm-hmm.
started working on improving that and setting the age to 21. But here's the reality, Roberta. Some of these kids, because of all the moving around, all the instability, maybe some abuse also that happens when these children are in the foster care system. There's unfortunately a lot of abuse that happens. By the time these kids get to 18, a lot of them say, I'm done. I don't care. I don't care if you're giving me free education. I just don't want to be in the system anymore. So we're finding a lot of children that are now teenagers who leave the system that way.
All right, I
So
want to ask a question about the first part of your answer. So, half the kids go back to their parents after some improvement in the home situation. What I know about my work, which is dealing with toxic parents, toxic people in general, is that they can be extremely persuasive to say, oh, everything is much better now. I'll never have that rage again. I will never hurt my child. I will never do these things. And the child goes back. What is the recidivism rate on kids going back to their parents and having to be taken away again?
I would say there's probably no hard study that's been done on that. So the rate of recidivism of a child going to back to a parent and then coming back into the foster system is probably not well documented. However, having said that, this does happen. And unfortunately, there are cases and they're popping up. We have a case of a 4-year-old in Los Angeles who was returned several times, who told the caseworkers, I don't want to go back to my parents, and he was killed. We have another case now that is hitting the national news where in New York, where a child was killed. And again, there were warning signs. They had had repeated calls. So we definitely have a failing in our system of
Yeah,
catching these people and focusing too much on getting the child back to the parent over protecting the child. That's probably one of our worst problems we have in this country. It's this idea that parents only the parents can really provide a healthy family. And that's simply not true. And I might get some feedback from people on that, but that's a reality. There are some parents who simply are bad people who have bad habits and are not good parents and are not healthy for their children.
well, let me just talk about this because a lot of the people who are listening will be folks who know my work. And why I'm so interested in this is because a toxic parent is a manipulative, deceitful parent. And what I know, and what my listeners who have experienced this know, is that those people that I call hijackals, these toxic people, they don't need a diagnosis. They just know they have the patterns, traits, and cycles of what I call hijackals. They will tell you anything you want to hear in order to get what they want. And they can be extremely persuasive and they make promises. But we have to learn to listen to children, I think, because the adult to adult relationship is very different than the child and their level of brain development that is screaming, no, 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 no. And there's no logic. They don't know why it's no, 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 no. They just are afraid. They don't want it to happen. And it's very, very difficult to calibrate. I realize that for professionals and also, in my opinion, I don't know that there are enough people to help these children, enough people who are well experienced in understanding toxic people, not just people with diagnosable things like the opioid epidemic or neglect or whatever, but people who are doing emotional, physical, sexual, verbal damage every day. And it's really not enough that they'll feed the child. It's what they're feeding them emotionally that could be very, very damaging for a lifetime.
You're absolutely right. And again, this is where procedures can come into place. And we have to have a change in our psychology and our focus towards children and the family. Children are still treated as a second citizen. They're still not treated as a person who has thought and can voice their feelings. And a lot of these children can. They at least know that they're fearful, they know that they've been hurt, and they know that this is going to happen again. And we have too many adults listening to adults. And there are cases of this happening where there was one in particular, this was a few years ago. There was a child who was chained outside, had a raw piece of chicken around his neck, and he's sitting on the porch. And the police, somehow he caught the attention of the police. And the police came up and he told the police officers, "I'm here because of my mother." They didn't believe the child until they knocked on the door, got entry into the home, and found it was just filthy. And there were three other kids in them in complete filth. And the mother, here's the sad part, she was a social worker. Yeah. So,
Well, that's the scary part to me, Richard, and certainly we don't want anyone to feel that that's the norm. But it's the scary part throughout our society is that there are people who have power over other people who are exercising that power in negative ways while appearing out of the home to be doing things in positive ways. And there's a prime example right there. You have a social worker who has power over other people's children and lives, and yet her own children are living in filth and squalor and being punished and unspeakable things. I mean, what kind of indelible memory does that child have of being chained with raw chicken around their neck, having to try and explain to adults that are kind of scary, they have guns and all kinds of things, trying to explain to them that this is true. This is really what's happening in my life. And so very difficult. And that child is scarred. There's no possible way of removing that memory. We can remove some of the magnitude of the memory or diminish the emotional attachment to the memory or stop it from triggering somewhat, but the memory never goes away.
oh, I get that. I mean, I remember the story. That's how hard it hit me. And the other stories that, we research or we come into contact with through our work. I've worked abuse cases. I've worked sexual assault cases with children. And so even though we're not counselors and we're not working with the children one-on-one, there's still terrible enough stories. And you're right, this is not the predominant situation in foster care. It is not a hopeless situation. There are thousands and thousands of really good-hearted caseworkers, supervisors, foster parents, and adoptive parents out there. But there is certainly a segment of that population who have no business being around children, have no interest in children, in their safety. And
Right.
that's what we need to work on. And again, pay more attention to these children. They can tell us what's going on and put their protection as the top priority, not necessarily getting them back to a particular parent.
Right. Such important stuff. And we want to give lots of props and kudos to foster parents who are doing a great job. We hear so frequently about the aberrant ones, the ones who are abusing children or trafficking children or doing something that makes the news. But all the unsung heroes and heroines of foster care who are looking after children, giving them the love and validation that they didn't receive at home, in their biological home or with their biological parents, whether it's for a short while or a long while. I mean, the love factor is a huge one in the development of a child. So very, very important. So I wanted to bring a few things to light that we perhaps didn't cover completely in the episodes, and you've given us an idea about what we can do beyond donating money and being a foster parent, which is to go on sites and talk about this and invite people over to your group on Facebook. Go to groups on Facebook and make it clear that we need to have more people in conversation about foster kids. But I have a deeper question, and I think that it pertains to the conversation we've just been having. Is there an agency that offers non-court support or friendship for these teens at 13 years up and further? Is there some kind of supportive system like the guardian ad litem system where a child can access better care themselves, maybe some counseling, maybe just some great group support? What can foster kids themselves reach out for?
Well, foster kids in and of themselves can engage more at the school level, and there are schools who are recognizing that they need to have programs that will, specifically address the needs of foster kids. And so in San Diego, for instance, their teachers are trained in how to recognize children who are in foster care, how to treat them in a particular way. And what I'm talking about is not sharing with everyone that there's a foster child. A lot of kids in foster care, they're embarrassed and they don't want everyone to know that they're in foster care. And so teachers have to be trained, though, to recognize this and understand that these kids do get bullied. They do get a lot of peer pressure. They are stressed. They are moving constantly. So their school is one of the great arenas where foster children could have some of their needs better met, because otherwise, the only other organizations that I can truly think of would be the Boys and Girls Clubs here in the U.S., because the only other organization would be CASA, but now we're talking about getting the children back into the court. But as far as their daily lives, it's having someone who wants to adopt them, maybe getting them into an organization that will, take them in. And school more and more is going to be providing that service and that care to these foster kids, because where else are they really going to go?
Yes, and we're fortunate in California because we have had some direction. We have had in our criminal justice system a woman who has made sure that everybody's getting educated to what's called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and she's created a quick test. I think it's 10 different questions that'll help somebody, a person in authority, a person who wants to understand a child's situation, to recognize whether there is adverse childhood experiences going on for that child. And that's something that is fortunate to have been added to our justice system, and ways that the police particularly will look at kids. I happen to know, because I belong to a women's group and we do a great deal of things that are related to social justice. So this is something that one of the detectives who belongs to our group told us that is, functioning all the time. But thank you so much for shedding some more light on the issues surrounding foster care. My guest is Richard Villasana, and you find him at Forever Homes for Foster Kids. He's been doing this, what now, Richard, 27 years?
Close to it.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you care so much and you've made such a difference in so many kids' lives. So remember that you can find Richard at that URL, and you can find his Facebook page at Family Finding MX. If you've enjoyed this Facebook Live, know it's an offshoot of my podcast. And the podcast episode that I'm talking about, where Richard and I had an in-depth conversation, is called Overcoming the Heartbreak of and for Foster Kids. You'll find it at emotionalsavvy.com, where all the episodes are there for you. Thank you for being my guest, Richard. And for people who want to find me, you can find me at transformingrelationship.com. I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. I'm so glad that you joined us, and thank you so much for being my guest, Richard.
You're so very welcome. It's been my pleasure.